Hello to Zoë Lenkiewicz. She is the lead author of the Global Waste Management Outlook 2024. The report that was published by UNEP and ISWA at the UNEA 6 in Nairobi by the end of February. And Zoë Lenkiewicz has over 20 years experience working in municipal solid waste management, including more than a decade focused on the Global South. So she is currently an advisor to various departments of the United Nations, national and local governments, NGOs, and consultancies. And she is contributing to intersessional work for the Plastic Treaty. Zoë was also lead author of the 2023 UNEP publication Towards Zero Waste, a catalyst for delivering the Sustainable Development Goals, and the award-winning Waste Aid Toolkit for community-led waste management. So, Zoë, I'm really glad that you are here and that you can now present the essence of the Global Waste Management Outlook. So, over to you.
Sure, thank you very much for the introduction, Nancy. I will just launch my slides. Here we go. Okay, so yeah, the Global Waste Management Outlook 2024 was launched at the end of February at the UNEA, that's the United Nations Environment Assembly Conference in Nairobi in Kenya. And it was a real privilege to be able to be there and to even to work on this report. A lot of analysis went into the report, some really novel analysis, which has given us some very valuable insights, I think. So, so without further ado, I will kind of launch into this summary of the report. So we took the best and most up-to-date waste data that we could find for as many countries as possible. As you will all appreciate, waste data is often not the best quality, and some countries don't have any waste data at all. So we worked with what we had, and what we found was that waste generation and economic growth are still so closely linked. No country on earth has managed to decouple waste generation from economic growth. So the more we earn, or the more income we generate, the more we buy, the more waste we generate. Simple as that. This is obviously a concern because economies are growing. Our economic models are based upon economic growth, which therefore means that waste is also projected to grow. Then we looked at what is happening with the waste that's generated today, and then projecting forward to 2050. And we see this quite alarming picture. So just to unpack this graph a little bit, the purple is what's happening in 2020, and the dark purple is the amount. So this is the quantity of waste generated, municipal waste generated. The darker block is the amount of that waste that's currently dumped or burned in the open, so uncontrolled waste. And then when we project forward to 2050, we have the green bars, and again the darker element of the bar is this uncontrolled waste element. So what we can see towards the right hand side of the graph there is that these fast growing economies in Africa, in Central South Asia, and East and Southeast Asia, because the economies are due to grow so fast, that means the waste generation is also due to grow fast. But these are also the regions that currently don't have adequate waste management services. So that means that we anticipate a lot more uncontrolled waste being generated in these areas, and more uncontrolled waste means more pollution. So to look ahead at 2050 and see, to really test the model that the analysis team had produced, we looked at 3 scenarios. The first was waste management as usual. So just assuming that, we continue to generate more waste as our economies grow, and we've got it as under control as, we're delivering waste services kind of at the same rate that we're delivering now, recycling as much as we're recycling now in percentage terms, and so on. Waste under control. The second scenario is kind of a halfway house. And this assumes that there are some upstream measures, some waste prevention measures, and some more additional downstream measures. So, more waste collection, more recycling, and so on. And then the final scenario was a more drastic shift. So, using refill systematically, really focusing on preventing waste, keeping materials in the loop for as long as possible. We assumed in this model that all countries would reach a municipal waste recycling rate of 60%, and that no waste would be uncontrolled. So no more dump sites, no more open burning. What did these scenarios reveal? Well, what we did, so if we look at the 0 bar, this is 2020, and we're looking at the increase in negative impacts of the 3 different scenarios on 3 different areas. Oh, here we are, it's at the bottom there. So the blue is the global warming potential, the orange is ecosystem quality, and the purple is human health impacts. Now, these are the 3 areas that we studied in detail to understand what impact these 3 different scenarios would have. And what we found with the waste management as usual scenario, so this, carrying on business as usual, you can see there on the left-hand side that the negative impacts on climate change, on ecosystems, and on human health will nearly double by 2050. Now, nearly doubling from 2020 baseline by 2050 is an extraordinary finding and really quite worrying, I think. The waste under control, you can see we're bringing the impacts down to just slightly below 2020 baseline figures. And the circular economy scenario is in fact the only one that represents any kind of real improvement on where we are today. And considering, if we go back to looking at how much waste is currently, generated and openly dumped and burned at the moment, we're absolutely not saying that 2020 is a good place to start from. It's already a bad place to start from. So this circular economy model is clearly, in terms of planetary health and human health, clearly the preferred path to take. Then for the first time, we looked at the actual costs of these 3 scenarios. Now, the costing data, I think, is the most interesting finding of all of this analysis, and it's really, novel analysis for this report. What we found was that at the moment in 2020, although yes, we're a few years on now, but looking at 2020 data, all of the waste management services globally came to around a value of $252 billion. However, when we factor in the additional costs of impacts of, open dumping and burning and general mismanagement of waste, those costs on the climate, on ecosystem quality, and on human health, we find that the actual net cost is $361 billion. Okay, we're also included in that, we're subtracting some cost to take account of the benefits of recycling. So, services, $252 billion, actual full cost of municipal waste, $361 billion. Okay, so then we projected forward with these 3 scenarios. So 2050, waste management as usual, we're looking at a full net cost of over $600 billion a year, just caused by municipal waste. Now, I would argue that this is an unbearable cost. This is not affordable by any stretch of the imagination. Even if we did have that kind of money to spend just on municipal waste, surely it would be much, much better spent elsewhere anyway. Okay, the waste under control scenario, full net costs $270 billion. So still an extraordinary amount of money. And then the circular economy model was the only scenario that presents a full net gain of $108 billion a year. So we feel that the messaging is very clear that the only way that we can really go for a livable planet is this circular economy model where we focus, significantly on waste prevention. So then we looked at why has progress been so slow? It's been a long time since the last Global Waste Management Outlook was published, nearly 10 years, in fact. And what's changed? actually very little, and in many areas we're actually moving backwards. So why hasn't waste been taken seriously? Well, we feel that the health and climate and ecosystem impacts have been overlooked and continue to be overlooked. And the report goes into quite some detail about how ministers in particular can, by recognising the health and climate impacts of mismanaged waste, they can actually use waste management as a mitigation tool and attract climate finance and other financial support to improve the waste management, because it's going to protect people's health, protect the climate. Also, women have been neglected. Women are still not included around the decision-making table. So although women are largely responsible for domestic scale waste management, when it comes to community level, we're not in the room. And that means that systems are not really designed for the key service users. Again, with the informal workers, these are normally the experts in an area, and yet when systems are formalised, they're often not in the room. Enforcement and penalties, don't need to tell ISWA members, need strengthening. Regulation generally from village level right up to international level definitely needs strengthening. And then getting the polluters to pay. We've gone through years and years of trying lots of different voluntary commitments, and they've been found to not work. So the time to regulate appears to be now. Then the report concludes with some recommended pathways. We discuss Industry 5.0, this interface between humans and data and technology. Now is really the time to harness that. There's a lot of waste apps and all sorts of AI tools and so on that are really helping to transform waste management, and in particular in the global south, helping countries to almost leapfrog, helping communities get services for the first time, get informal workers, banked for the first time. Mandatory schemes to ensure that polluters pay. We've found voluntary schemes aren't working. It has to be regulated. Being inclusive with our citizen engagement approaches, integrating the principles of a just transition to a circular economy, because a circular economy is just that, it's an economy. It will not be just by default. So we have to really pay attention to this aspect, the very human aspect of the circular economy, and make sure that it's not exacerbating inequalities. And finally, building national expertise. So we felt strongly that every country needs to have its own waste managers so they can design systems that are appropriate for their own country and that will support their own population's needs. So that's it in a nutshell. I think this is just the final slide now. Just a short quote from the end of the report. Pollution from waste knows no borders. So it's in everyone's interests to commit to waste prevention and invest in waste management where it's lacking. The solutions are available and ready to be scaled up. What's needed now is strong leadership to set the direction and pace required and to ensure no one is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zoë. Thank you for this concentrate of a really interesting report. I do recommend everybody to read the full report with a lot of interesting information and knowledge. So just to ask you a very short question, because I'm also really curious, how can the finding of this report help shift the whole discussion towards the zero waste and the circular economy?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nancy. So I think that the key findings of this report, by putting the harm to the planet and planetary and human health in monetary terms, is quite a novel approach. And I think that this is going to be key, actually, to getting waste management taken out of just the Minister of Environment's concerns, and actually helping the Minister of Health, the Minister of Finance, and so on, really recognise that this is, the waste management is a very strong tool for them to use to further their own objectives. So we're hoping that by presenting it in this different way, we're able to bring more people into the conversation and hopefully finally move waste management up the agenda.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. I do agree. I think it's really interesting to have this approach, and so we saw that there is quite a big difference between different parts of the world. So how can nations and stakeholders actually support to improve waste management in the global south and those regions who are really need it?
That's it. And there's some, thanks. Yeah, there's some really, really good examples of work that's taking place. I think one of the key things that that we wanted to stress in the report is that it's much better if local people have the expertise to design systems around what their community needs, because we've seen a lot of well-meaning but failed technology transfer examples from the global north to the global south, and there's such very different contexts. So in Europe, for example, labor is very expensive, but technology is cheap, and we have a wonderful road network. So building one centralized facility to serve a number of cities even or towns makes a lot of sense. Whereas if you're somewhere where the road network is terrible, which, let's face it, is a lot of places, we're blessed in Europe. Poor road network, very high unemployment in some of these places. Why would you build technology that's going to require maintenance, spare parts, lots of electricity, ongoing bills, when actually you could build, design a system that's more human-centric, that provides employment, and that is, really suitable for the skills and capacity and capability that is available in that local area. We're lucky to have ISWA. It's a blessing. And in some countries like the UK, for example, we've got the Chartered Institution, which was great when I was developing as a junior waste manager. But for many people, they don't have any kind of national association. So it's more difficult to learn how to be a waste manager. So we think that actually the skills sharing is more important than trying to sell technology into these countries, giving local people the skills so that they can then design systems that are really appropriate for the local area. It's going to be much more sustainable, much more affordable as well. But it's going to take time. It's going to take time and a concerted effort. So we're hoping that, donors as well, donor organizations will recognize the messages in this report, and start to consider different models of supporting countries in improving their waste management.
There are some really interesting points here, and I would really hope that this short presentation will boost a lot of discussions, because I think that's something we really need, and to take this time to develop the knowledge. So we thank you so much for presenting the Global Waste Management Outlook 2024 today. So looking forward to seeing you in the next possible opportunity.
Super. Thanks so much for inviting me. Sorry I couldn't make it live, but I appreciate your time. Thank you, Nancy.